There is a sentence in the Bible that almost everyone has read and almost no one has stopped to question. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. Genesis 2:2. You have heard it your whole life. Maybe you heard it in Sunday school. Maybe a priest read it at Mass during the Easter Vigil. Maybe you have read it yourself 100 times. And if you are honest, somewhere in the back of your mind, you have always pictured the same thing. God working for 6 days, building light and sky and sea and land and creatures and human beings, and then on the seventh day, sitting down, exhaling. Done. Like a carpenter at the end of a long week. But here is the problem with that picture. It is completely wrong. And the moment you see what the original Hebrew actually says, and what the ancient world actually understood about divine rest, you will never read Genesis the same way again. The word that changes everything. Let us start where the confusion begins. The English word rested in Genesis 2:2 comes from the Hebrew verb shavat. And shavat does not mean to recover from exhaustion. It does not mean to stop because you are tired. It does not carry any implication of fatigue at all. Shavat means to cease, to stop, to complete. It is the root of the word Shabbat, the Sabbath. And the Sabbath was never about God needing a nap. But there is a second Hebrew word that deepens this even further. The word menuha. Rest in the ancient Hebrew world was not the absence of activity. Menuha was something you entered. It was a state of completeness, of order established, of sovereignty declared. The great Jewish scholar Abraham Joshua Heschel put it this way: the Sabbath is not a day of absence. It is a cathedral in time, not a pause in creation, but the culmination of it. The Catholic Church has carried this understanding for 2,000 years. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 345, states directly, "The Sabbath speaks of an inward rest of God. God's rest on the seventh day does not connote divine inactivity, but the fullness of his accomplished work." God did not stop because he ran out of energy. He stopped because the work was complete. And in the ancient world, that distinction meant everything. What rest meant in the ancient world? To understand Genesis 2, you have to understand something about how the ancient Near East thought about divine rest. Because the original audience of Genesis was not reading this story the way we read it today. In the ancient world, when a god rested, it was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of victory. Scholars of ancient Near Eastern literature, including the Catholic biblical theologian John Walton, have demonstrated that in the cosmology of the ancient world, a deity rested in a temple after establishing order over chaos. The rest was an act of enthronement. It meant the battle was over. Order had been established. The king had taken his throne. Think about what that means for Genesis. In Genesis 1, God speaks light into darkness. He separates water from land. He fills the formless void with structure and life and order. He takes chaos and makes cosmos. And then, on the seventh day, he rests. He is not exhausted. He is enthroned. The seventh day is not the epilogue to creation. It is the point of creation. The whole 6 days were building toward this moment. The moment when God takes his place as sovereign ruler over everything he has made. And he does it not with a sword or a declaration of war. He does it with rest. The seventh day has no evening. Here is something almost no one notices when they read Genesis 1. Every single day in the creation account ends with the same phrase. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Evening and morning, the second day. All the way through day 6. But when you get to day 7, that phrase disappears. There is no evening. There is no morning. The seventh day has no closing formula. The rabbis noticed this centuries ago. The Church Fathers noticed it too. St. Augustine, writing in the 4th century, reflected on this silence and concluded that the seventh day is not a closed day. It is an open one. It is still, in some sense, ongoing. The Catechism echoes this in paragraph 2175, noting that the Lord's Day is an anticipation of the eternal rest God has prepared for His people, that the Sabbath rest of Genesis points forward to something that has not yet fully arrived. The seventh day is not just a historical event, it is a theological promise, a day without an evening, because what it points to has no end. What the Catholic Church teaches about this rest. The Catholic understanding of the Sabbath and Sunday worship carries the full weight of this history. The Church teaches that Sunday, the Lord's Day, is not simply a replacement for the Jewish Sabbath, it is the fulfillment of it. The Catechism, paragraph 2174, explains that Sunday is the day of the resurrection, the first day of a new creation, the day on which Christ, by rising from the dead, completed what the seventh day of Genesis had promised. If the original Sabbath rest was God enthroning Himself as King over the first creation, then the resurrection is God enthroning Christ as King over the new creation. The rest of Genesis 2 and the rest of Easter Sunday are telling the same story, one at the beginning, one in the middle, and one still coming at the end. Pope John Paul II, in his 1998 apostolic letter, Dies Domini, the Day of the Lord, wrote that Sunday is the weekly Easter, the day on which the Church gathers not out of obligation alone, but out of joy, because the victory that Genesis 2 declared has been confirmed and completed in the empty tomb. Creation rested. Christ rose. The seventh day and the first day collapsed into one. The temple connection. There is one more layer here that changes everything, and it comes from the work of Catholic biblical scholar John Walton and others who have studied the ancient Near Eastern background of Genesis carefully. In the ancient world, a temple was not primarily a place of worship in the modern sense. A temple was where a deity came to rest. After a god had established order, after the victory was won, the cosmos arranged, the kingdom secured, the god came to dwell in the temple, to rest there, to reign from there. When God rests on the seventh day, Genesis is describing the entire cosmos as God's temple. The 6 days of creation are not a construction project. They are the furnishing of a sanctuary. Light, sky, land, sea, creatures, humanity. These are not just physical realities. They are the sacred furnishings of the dwelling place of God. And on the seventh day, God moves in. The rest is not absence, it is presence. The most intimate, sovereign dwelling presence imaginable. This is exactly why the Sabbath commandment in Exodus 20 is not framed as advice, it is framed as participation. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. You are not being told to take a break. You are being invited into something, into the rest that God Himself entered, into the presence that has been there since the beginning. The Catechism captures this in paragraph 2176. The Sabbath is at the heart of Israel's law, and the Church's Sunday observance carries that same invitation, to enter, weekly, into the rest of God. Here is why all of this matters beyond theology. We live in a world that has turned busyness into a virtue. Rest is something you earn, something you schedule when everything else is done, something that feels uncomfortably close to laziness if you stop moving for too long. But Genesis 2 says something radical. Rest is not the reward at the end of the work. Rest is the goal of the work. God did not create for 6 days and then rest. He created for 6 days in order to rest, in order to dwell, to reign, to be present in what He had made. and He built that same rhythm into you. Not because you need to recover, but because you were made for something more than productivity. You were made to enter the presence of the One who rested on the seventh day, who dwells in His creation, who invites you, every week, to stop not because everything is finished, but because He is enough. The Sabbath was never about tiredness. It was always about intimacy. And that invitation, the one God issued on the seventh day, the one Christ fulfilled on the first day of the new creation, the one the Church extends every Sunday at the altar, has never been rescinded. The seventh day is still open. The rest is still waiting. And it was never about being tired.